Welcome back to How to Get Away with Plunder, the only show that teaches you the fine art of enriching yourself at the public's expense and walking away scot-free. I'm your host, Nana.
And I'm Rain. In today's episode, we're not just talking about stealing money. We're talking about the magic trick of making the evidence in the people who saw it disappear even after you've been caught. And for our case study, we're bringing back a familiar case in the previous episode, the Philippine PDAF scam or the pork barrel scandal.
Actually, how familiar are you with the pork battle scam?
Actually, since more than a decade na to, ang hirap din naman maging super duper familiar about it since 2025 na ngayon and this happened like around 2013 pa.
Oo.
So like, 'di ba? Bilang Gen Z, it's very
Totoo.
hard to keep up with this study, with this topic.
So, last time we actually talked about the Commission on Audit and how they were involved sa PDAF scam. And they were considered gatekeepers. And we also taught you guys how to bypass their initial checks. And during that point, it was all pretty formal, hindi pa ganun ka-loose. Pero ngayon, since we're getting into the actual cases, let's try to simmer down and just turn this into maybe a casual conversation. So now we're gonna be talking about the case of the pork barrel scam and not how there were just a few bad apples, but an entire systemic rot. So apparently, a 2016 audit revealed that around 8.3 billion pesos in public funds, that's like a staggering 6.156 billion, was funneled into non-existent or ghost projects. So they all center around one guy. And kilalang kilala nyo to, guys. His name is Senator Bong Revilla. And despite being the primary suspect, he actually got away scot-free.
And his case is the ultimate playbook. So today's lesson is Vanishing Acts. How do you make evidence disappear in plain sight? Let's break it down step by step.
Okay, so let's start with step one. Step one is all about using a labyrinth of lies. Labyrinth? A labyrinth, guys, is actually a map, a very complicated map that comes from Greek mythology. So, getting into the first lesson, when it comes to using a labyrinth of lies, you don't just steal money, because that, buddy, is clumsy. The real art is to build a system where money disappears into a fictional world that you created. So we touched on COA sa huling episodes, diba? Now, the foundation actually of the pork barrel scam were ghost NGOs. So kung familiar kayo ngayon sa ghost projects, meron tayong ghost NGOs. So these aren't real organizations. They're characters in your story, so to speak, created for one purpose. And that is to receive government funds and then, as one official perfectly put it, they'll be vanishing into thin air once the money is released.
And that brings us to the core principle of this topic. Use your fiction. We're not just talking about fudging some numbers. This is about constructing an entire believable universe on paper. Magka-creative writing tayo. The whole enterprise runs on phony paperwork, fabricated beneficiary lists, and fake receipts. Liquidation reports must become works of creative writing, claiming aid was delivered that never existed, complete with forged signatures of mayors and officials who have no idea that they're the guest stars in your drama.
In fairness, ang daming mga requirements para maging plunderer.
Yes.
Very effort. Pero one of the things that also kind of surprised me here is, like, imagine including all of these big players, like mayors, senators, officials, and they're just like guest stars. Imagine, cameo ka sa Marvel Cinematic Universe,
Diba?
pero hindi mo alam at hindi ka rin bayad. So, the audacity of it is breathtaking, right? And that's the point, actually. When it comes to plunder, you need to be bold. You need to be brave. In one case, a list of supposed farmer beneficiaries even cast a sitting Supreme Court justice in a leading role. In another, 12 village captains listed on a report swore that they'd never even heard of the project, let alone received anything. So the goal here is to create a system where by the time auditors arrived, wala ng NGO in sight, leaving behind a paper trail that leads deeper into your maze, not out of it.
And this isn't just sloppy bookkeeping. It's intentional sabotage of reality. Gumagawa ka ng sarili mo universe. So
Oo.
again, parang Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Exactly.
The Commission on Audit found that government agencies would simply handpick these pledging NGOs and write them into contracts without any real vetting. Many of these NGOs were just recycled actors, incorporated with the same group of people, using multiple tax IDs or listing fictitious addresses. The paper trail isn't just thin, it's a deliberate, magnificent illusion. You're not hiding the truth, you're replacing it. So talagang, ayun nga, di ba? Delulu is the silulu talaga.
Oo.
Talagang ang winner dito ay yung mga delulu kasi kaya sila nakapag naging mandarambong dahil delulu. Yun lang talaga.
Talaga sila. If you believe that you can gain over millions of pesos, billions of pesos actually,
Yes.
all you need to do is believe. So that moves us on to step 2. Step 2 is all about ensuring that your signature isn't your signature. And how does that work actually? So, pagdating sa mga pagtatayo ng NGO, if you are the spearhead of this organization, ang expectation naman, di ba, is that your signature will be in all of the administrative paperwork, di ba? Yun yung inisip ng prosecution against Senator Bong Revilla. That his signature will appear on all of the letters endorsing these ghost projects. But
here is where the magic trick really gets clever. During the trial, the smoking gun misfired spectacularly. The prosecution's own witnesses, all former employees of the scheme's mastermind Janet Napoles, ended up systematically dismantling the evidence against Revilla.
And you know how we mentioned that this is basically a cinematic universe? Ang pinaka-star ng universe na to ay si Marina Sula. So, Marina Sula is Napoles' bookkeeper. And in a very heartfelt, tearful testimony on June 28, 2018, she actually took back her earlier statement and dropped a massive bombshell. She told the entire prosecution team that the pivotal whistleblower Ben Hurluy was the one who forged Revilla's signature on all of the endorsement letters. Basically, kung group work to, yung sacrificial lamb si Ben Hurluy.
Talaga.
Mm.
'Di ba? Nilaglag talaga siya. Para kang inalis sa research, inalis yung
Pangalan mo, 'di ba? Oh, sabay pa.
So, let that sink in. Yung whistleblower na nag-start ng entire investigation was now being accused of creating the very evidence used against the senator. This claim was echoed by two other witnesses, Merlina Sunyas and Mary Arlene Baltasar, who categorically revealed that Louis was the one signing off those letters. Kung sinasabi nila na hindi nga si Revilla yon, kung hindi si Ben Hurluy.
So the lesson here actually is very important. And don't forget this because we might quiz you on it. I'm just kidding. Plausible deniability is actually your ultimate weapon here. If your signature is on a very damning document, your first move is to prove that that's not my signature. No, that's not my signature. And eventually, through all of this, through all of these plays, through all of these tearful recantations of Bong Revilla's signature actually being forged, the Sandigan Bayan ultimately agree. And citing a defense handwriting expert and calling the forgery a quote-unquote great blow to the prosecution. So once the signatures were deemed fake, the court found it highly improbable that documents could implicate Revilla at all. The link was officially cut.
So now, the third step. But you know what? Let's recap. First step is
Okay,
to
so
use a labyrinth of lies. Second step is to ensure that your signature isn't your signature. And of course, let's now go on to the third step, which is the art of silencing whistleblowers. Here's where it gets tricky. What happens when your own people turn against you? This brings us to the most delicate and crucial step: witness management. You can't just shred papers, you have to neutralize the people who know the actual truth. The case against Revilla initially relied on four key insiders, but one by one, their stories unraveled on the witness stand, creating a tangled web of contradictions that became impossible to follow. So sobrang gumulo yung kwento, 'di ba?
Oo.
Naguluhan na sa Sandigang Bayan, talaga namang ang ombudsman, everyone was involved. So parang, alam mo yun, parang palilito ka na kung sino yung nagsasabi ng totoo.
And I think, that's the whole point of it. That's the whole point of your labyrinth, so to speak. Dapat, sa sobrang complicated nung maze mo, walang makakalabas at wala ring makakapasok. And of course, this means we need to go back to our main girl, Miss Marina Sula. And taking back her statement wasn't actually just a change of heart. She claimed that she was actually coached by the ombudsman prosecution team to stick to Louis' story so that there wouldn't be any conflicting statements. She said that she was actually afraid to tell the truth earlier, fearing that she'd lose her immunity under the witness protection program if she, quote unquote, said the wrong thing. And this is a really great way of convincing people that you are innocent rather than just saying, "Oh, I'm innocent. I didn't do anything wrong." Implicate someone else. What they did here was that they pulled in yung ombudsman prosecution team. Pinagmukha nilang masasama yung prosecution team,
Yes.
'di ba?
So ngayon, siya ang mukhang kawawa.
Oo.
'Di ba? Binabaliktad. Sobrang main character talaga. 'Di ba? Siyempre gusto mo ikaw yung kawawa kasi gano'n ang mga main character, 'di ba? Gawin nating kontrabida tong ombudsman prosecution team. Ako ang kawawa dito. So, this is a masterclass in silencing. You don't need threats of violence. You create a system where the witness's own freedom depends on them telling a very specific story. The prosecution itself suggested that Sula might have recanted or she took back her statement out of fear of being charged in other related cases. When the truth becomes more dangerous than the lie, the witness effectively silenced themselves.
And by the way, it wasn't just Sula. Meron siyang supporting cast. Another key whistleblower, Merlina Sunyas, the girl we mentioned earlier, was actually declared a quote-unquote hostile witness after she testified that she never personally saw Revilla receive any money from Napoles. So the witnesses who were actually supposed to be the prosecution's greatest strength, their quote-unquote smoking gun, winded up undercutting each other so thoroughly that their testimonies became worthless. Hindi lang to masterclass in silencing. This is also a masterclass in self-sabotage. Diba?
And this created the final impenetrable firewall. The witnesses could only testify that they gave money to Revilla's aide, attorney Richard Cambe. But the court ruled there was no proof that money ever reached Revilla. So, 'di ba? Naging inosente na talaga siya. To assume it did based on hearsay would be illogical, according to the court. The money trail stopped cold, one step away from the target.
Sobrang frustrating nun. Going back to yung analogy namin in a research group, imagine kung isang buong grupo kayo, tapos parang magde-defense na lang kayo.
Eto na, wala
Oo.
talaga.
Tapos bigla ika-cut off ng prof na.
Parang, ang pangit pala nito, ang gulo pala ng
Oo.
research nyo. Ayoko nito.
Diba?
Revise.
Revise. Oh, God. That's insane. So now we move on to step 4. And that is the disappearing paper trail. So,
You have ghost NGOs, forged documents, and contradictory witnesses. The final step seems to be making sure no concrete evidence survives to reach the courtroom.
yun yung ultimate goal ninyo. Dapat walang any sort of damning evidence na aabot sa korte. And that's what the whole paper trail and the maze is all about. The point of the paper trail isn't really to lead the prosecution to the finale of catching you. It's about putting them between a rock and a hard place. You're finally gonna show them na, oh, sinundan nyo tong trail na to, may napala ba kayo? Wala! So that's the point. So the paper trail must die long before the trial. In the Revilla case, his name on key documents was the only link. And once those were ruled as forgeries, the link was cut. The prosecution couldn't even get an expert to trace the bank records properly. Imagine that.
Diba? And I read that certain documents like bank warrants and disbursement orders were dropped as evidence because they weren't part of the original formal complaint rather.
Oo. Diba? So, see? Holes, gaps, ambiguity. As long as vague ka, wag mong i-label. That is your shield. So by the end, the only paper trail left was the defense's own expert on forgeries. When auditors and prosecutors came looking, all they could find were ghost NGOs that were vanished, falsified reports, and insiders pointing fingers at each other.
So let's recap the masterclass. First step, create a network of disposable ghost NGOs. Second, become an expert in forgery to create a plausible but deniable paper trail. 3. Ensure no single person has the full story so even whistleblowers end up discrediting each other. And 4. Let the evidence die a natural death through procedural gaps and the lack of reliable records.
So now let's move on to what we'd like to call the grand finale. Ano nga ba ang grand finale natin? And that is the acquittal. The acquittal! The acquittal. Okay. So,
Acquittal?
the acquittal. So, in December 18, the Sandigan Bayan Court acquitted Senator Bong Revilla of plunder. That means they basically let him go. The final verdict read like a summary of a failed magic trick. There wasn't a smoking gun. There weren't any signatures. They were just forgeries. And the bank records from the Anti-Money Laundering Council were actually deemed inconclusive or, useless because prosecutors failed to present an expert to actually trace the money.
The court concluded that the prosecution had left so many gaps and failed to show the hand of Revilla in the scheme. So ngayon parang mukha na talagang wala siyang kinalaman,
Oo.
di ba? Nadawit lang siya. The paper evidence, as one report put it, had died long before it reached court. Even during the highly publicized Senate hearings years earlier, Mastermind Janet Napoles simply stonewalled, repeating, "I don't know," to every question, frustrating senators who could do little more than engage in political theater.
It was actually, I know it's illegal, but it was a perfect vanishing act, right? The money disappeared into ghost NGOs. The paper trail was basically a hall of mirrors with forgeries and fabrications, and the witnesses, caught in a web of fear and self preservation, effectively silenced each other in the end.
So for those taking notes on how to get away with plunder, today's lesson is clear. It's not just about the crime. It's about erasing it from history. Master the art of the vanishing act, and you might just walk free.
That's actually your next assignment. But, of course, that is all the time we have for today, so join us next time as we explore another chapter in the playbook of the powerful. I'm Nana.
And I am Rain. For the next episode, we'll talk about the three B's. Bribe, deal, and destis.